Okay. What did he say? So we loaded up the bike, got all the bikes. We were headed down the highway. We were in Burlington, one of the exits. I know it well. And Chuck goes, "Oh dear, oh dear." I said, "Chuck, did you see a deer?" He said, "No, your bike just fell off." I said, "Chuck, that's an expensive bike." So we stopped, backed up the house, got the bike. 18-wheeler had nicked it. Both wheels were destroyed. The frame was fine. Still have the bike today. We did the ride a few weeks later. I never fixed the saddle or the handlebars because it's a great talking point. We go on bike rides and friends will say, "Paul, what happened to your bike here?" Well, let me tell you what happened. So today I'm the messenger. I mean, I'm going to talk about the U.S. debt, and it's a difficult situation. Couple of just personal disclaimers. One is I'm not coming to you today to say that I'm an expert on this issue, because I'm not. But I'm a concerned American citizen who loves this country, and I'm very worried about the way our debt is growing exponentially. And we'll talk more about that later. Nick, it's not a political issue. This is not a partisan issue. Both parties have been a part of this over the years, and it's going to take both parties coming together to fix it. But they got to start soon, because it's, as you'll see in the slides, it's not a pretty sight. So let me see if I can do this right here real quick. Okay, couple of legal disclaimers, Jessica. Investment advisory firms, we're not giving investment advice. This is purely for informational purposes. Can you see it? And then we've got about 11 or 12 great sources we have to disclaim. So a couple of weeks ago, the national debt stood at $35 trillion, okay? This morning I checked at it, and it's now $35,300 billion. So the debt has gone up a couple of $100 billion just since we started working on this program. As Chuck said, I work for Ronald Reagan. I think my interest in the debt really has been since I worked for Reagan and Senator Helms. They were both fiscal conservatives who felt like we should, if we couldn't have a balanced budget, we should be very close to balancing a budget, not spend more than you bring in. And about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I started watching the national debt a little carefuler. In the last 5 years, particularly since COVID, and I'll show you some slides, I've really become, this is almost my passion, because I'm worried about it, and really everybody's worried about it, but nobody's talking about it. So just a question. How many of you, show of hands, how many of y'all have any concerns about the debt? Raise your hand. Wow, okay. You would be in agreement with most Americans. 75% of voters today agree that we should be worried about the national debt. 2/3 of Americans believe that the national debt is an unfair legacy to leave our children. 81% are saying that their concern about the debt has recently increased, probably since the pandemic. 83% of voters think the President and Congress should spend more time addressing the debt. Y'all probably don't know this gentleman, but in doing some research, I found this gentleman who's probably done more as one person to promote the national debt. His name is Seymour Durst. He lives in New York City. He's passed away. Family came from Poland in 1900. He built a tremendous real estate empire. The family came with $3 in their pocket from Poland. Family's worth $6 billion today. They owned 10% of the World Trade Center. Real estate all over. He grew up during the Depression. He was worried about the debt. And any idea who he is? What he did? On the side of one of his buildings in New York City, he constructed personally the first debt clock. Of course, now their debt clock is a big debt clock in downtown New York, but he put the first debt clock together, spent over $100,000 to build it, 300 light bulbs. And at that time, if you can make it out, the debt was 2.7 trillion. Today, we're $35 trillion. So other Americans also are worried about the debt. Some of these that you'll know more than Seymour Durst. John McCain, we ought to pay down the national debt. The American people are tired of people who make promises about cutting taxes they cannot keep. And I hate to say it, but the current candidates today are talking more about cutting taxes than they are the debt. Erskine Bowles, North Carolina native. The U.S. debt is the single biggest threat that I see to innovation in American business. My hero in the financial world, Warren Buffett. I could end the deficit in 5 minutes. Just pass a law that says that anytime there's a deficit more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for re-election. Probably, Chuck, probably not constitutional, but that's not a bad idea. President Obama, today we're asking you to help us begin to tackle the challenges of our nation's long-term fiscal situation. That this is not going to be easy. It will require us to make difficult decisions and face challenges we've long neglected. But I refuse to leave our children with a debt that they cannot repay. And that means taking responsibility now in this administration for getting spending under control. My former boss, Ronald Reagan, for decades we've piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but only for a limited period of time. Why then should we think that collectively, as a nation, we're not bound by the same limitation? So the title of my talk today was the U.S. debt, is it a blessing or a curse? And you'll see kind of where I get that title in the next 2 slides. John Hamilton, a founding father of this country, the first Treasury Secretary, quoted as saying, a national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. On the other hand, Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, I'm one of those who do not believe that a national debt is a national blessing, but rather a curse to the Republic, inasmuch as it is calculated to raise around the administration a moneyed aristocracy, dangerous to the liberties of our country. Just a quick snapshot since 1980 when Reagan came in, you can see the debt. The title of this slide is The National Debt is Not a Partisan Issue. The debt has continued to go up under all administrations. The little black stair steps are the times that we have had to raise the debt ceiling. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Here is how I feel about this situation. It's like the frogs, the fable of the frogs in the boiling water. I think if you throw a frog in hot water, he'll jump out. But if you put the frogs in the water, cold water, and gradually turn the temperature up, they'll perish. I kind of feel like that's where we are today. The other night, some of y'all may have watched the debate Tuesday night. I sat down and I looked at everything they said. And I looked at every time they spoke. I wanted to see how many times they mentioned the debt or the deficit. The vice president and the past president spoke 36 times in the first segment, 36 exchanges, 0 mention of the debt or the deficit. They spoke another 16 times after the break, zero comments on the debt or the deficit. In their 2 closing comments, no mention of the debt or deficit. I just feel like that everybody's concerned about it, but nobody's doing anything about it. Let's talk for a second about the history of the U.S. debt. Now, the way economists look at the debt is a percentage of GDP. The number is important, but it's more important how big the economy is. When Reagan was president, he was the first president to have a year when the debt went over $1 trillion. In 1980, our GDP was about 2.8 trillion. So we had about a 30% debt to GDP, okay? The debt has gone from $1 trillion to 35 trillion. Our GDP has grown a lot from 2.8 to 28 trillion, but it's the percentage that makes a difference. So GDP, as you well know, is all goods and services produced by a country in a given year. By comparing what the government owns to what it produces, The debt to GDP gives you ability of the government's ability to pay the debt back. The Organization for Economic Development encourages that countries should have a debt to GDP of below 50. So this chart looks at our debt to GDP from 1790 to 2020. And you can see that over the years, there have been periods at the time when the debt has been significantly higher, primarily during periods of war. World War II, the debt got up to its all-time high, 106% of GDP. But look what happened after World War II. Economic boom, taxes were raised, and the debt went back down into the 30s. Okay, with COVID right now, the very end of the chart, you can see that we're right in 2023, the end of last year, we were at 97%. 97% of debt to GDP. Okay, 1835. Make that 1835 over here. That's the only year in this country's history we've ever been debt-free. Andrew Jackson paid off the debt. We had no debt. And then obviously the Civil War and World War I, obviously. More recently, in the last 2 decades, in 2001, our debt to GDP was 32%. As I mentioned, last year it was at 97%. On a positive note, things can be done to address the problem. You see 1998 right there, where the debt ceiling is going down. Do you remember Jimmy Carter? Not Jimmy Carter. Do you remember Bill Clinton, State of the Union? The era of big government is over. Newt Gingrich, Contract with America. Republicans and Democrats worked together in the late 90s. And we had 3 years of balanced budgets, 98, 99, 2000. We actually paid down $500 billion of the debt. But that's the last time since then. So as we speak today, the debt is approaching 100% of GDP. This chart is from the Congressional Budget Office, and it looks at the debt over the same historical period, but the vertical dotted line to the left, or to my left, shows what's actually happened, and to the right shows the projected. So the Congressional Budget Office is projecting that by 2054, in 30 years, our debt to GDP will be 166%. I get emails every day from the CBO. You can sign up, it's free. I've never seen them make a revision that was better. It's always worse. So I would say that 166 is probably conservative. Let's talk a little bit about the debt today and why it's different than it has been in the past. We've got a mismatch, obviously, between spending and revenue. We have rising interest rates. We've got an aging baby boomer population, and we've got increasing cost of health care. That's what's driving the debt. This chart looks at the historical spending going back to 1989. The red line is government spending. The blue line is government revenue. And you can see the dotted lines that basically point out the average of each of those two categories. I think this is what Warren Buffett was talking about. The average spending by our government has been about 20% of GDP over the last 40 years, 20%. Today, we're closer to 24%. Revenues have averaged 17%, and we're in that same ballpark. Okay, so the problem is that spending is much higher than it needs to be. Why is that? Congressional Budget Office looks out to 2034. Look to the left of the vertical dotted line and look at the actual deficits. These are deficits by year. The blue is the light blue, Carolina blue is the interest. The dark blue, deep blue is the primary deficit. So you can see in 2019, we had about $1 trillion deficit. And what happened in 2020? COVID, pandemic. Our deficits went up 3.1, 2.8. Got back down to about 1.4. Last year, the deficit was 1.7. This year, it's going to be between 1.9 and $2 trillion. Our fiscal year ends in about 2 weeks. The U.S. government runs from October 1st to September 30th. So we're about 2 weeks to finish up the 2024 fiscal year. But look at the deficits that the CBO are projecting in the next 10 years. $2 trillion, and eventually in 2033 and 34, approaching $3 trillion a year. That's some serious money. Why? What's causing this? Three things: healthcare, Social Security, and interest. We used this slide for a town hall with clients last year. I didn't replace it, but I looked at the CBO website the other day. 81% of projected growth in spending is now 87%. Okay? So that's what Congress is dealing with. It's kind of an uncontrollable situation. Aging population. We want good health care. We've got good health care. We want to live longer. We're living longer. Look at this. Baby boomers. Look in the middle right there. Baby boomers by 2030. I'm a baby boomer. Every baby boomer will be 65 years or older in 2030. Look at the populations above baby boomer, above 65, 75 to 84, people over 85. That elderly population of the country is growing rapidly, which is a good thing. The United States has, I think, the best healthcare system in the world. I wouldn't want to have healthcare anywhere else. $12,500 per year is what our healthcare system costs per capita. That's twice the average of other developed countries. The average for other developed countries is about $6,400. Countries that we would compare: France is $6,500, Germany's $8,000. Our healthcare system is good, but it's very expensive. As you get older, your healthcare expenses do not go down; they go up. Look at the growth of healthcare expenses per capita for different age groups. You can see that when you get in the 65 to 84 range, it almost doubles from 45 to 64. And 85 or older, $35,000 per year. That's part of the problem. Medicare is probably going to double in the next 30 years because of healthcare, elderly population. Talk just for a second about the debt ceiling. That hasn't been in the news recently. It will in December or January. We did a town hall last May, I think, Jessica, on the debt ceiling. And basically Congress just punted. They basically just said, we're going to postpone the debt ceiling to January 25, and everything that's spent will be covered. Normally, Congress raises the debt ceiling to a specific amount. The debt ceiling is basically the maximum amount of money the U.S. Treasury can borrow to pay for programs that have already been approved by Congress. Here again, Nick, Chuck, this is not a political issue. The debt ceiling since Eisenhower has been raised 83 times in Republican and Democratic administrations. Since this does not show Trump or Biden, but now it's over 90. And since history, it's been raised over 100 times. Let's dive into the federal budget just for a second. This is 2023 because we're still finishing up 24 right now. Look at the outside circle and you'll see total spending. You'll see 6.1 in total spending. You've got 3.8 in mandatory spending, things that are mandated by Congress. You've got 1.7 in discretionary. You got $700 billion in interest. And then look at the revenues, 4.4. Somebody got a calculator? The difference is 1.7. That was what was added to the debt last year. What worries me, and should worry all of y'all, is that mandatory spending, because of what we just looked at, healthcare, elderly population interest, that is growing rapidly, and interest expense is growing rapidly. $700 billion in interest expense last year. This year it's going to be about 900. Next year over $1 trillion. Okay, so literally what's happening, mandatory and interest are squeezing the discretionary part of the budget. Okay, discretionary spending is obviously taking a plunge. So if you look at the left-hand side, the dark blue, the Duke blue arrows, is a percentage of federal spending. 2013, we were spending 65% of spending on mandatory. It jumped to 73% of mandatory spending, and by 2033, mandatory spending is going to be about 76% of the budget. Look at discretionary, It's averaged about 7%, but you can see discretionary spending is dropping like a rock because of the other programs are crowding it out. This is what worries me. I wish Gary Pendleton was here. Defense spending and interest on the debt. This chart goes back to the mid-'80s. The blue line is defense spending. The red line is interest on the debt. Defense has always been more than interest on the debt. Look what's happening since the pandemic. Interest on the debt has exploded, and now this year we surpassed interest on the debt is more than we spent on defense. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, the most significant threat to our national security is our debt. Interest costs are rising. This looks at the interest expense for the United States every year going back to 2007. And you can see on the left-hand side there, you can see 200 billion, 253. We've been in the 250, $300 billion range for a good while. The blue bar is 2022. So why would interest rates have risen? But why would the interest have gone up so much in 22? We spent $6 trillion the 2 previous years. So now, as they say, the chickens are kind of coming home to roost. If you look at the largest line items in the federal budget, obviously Social Security is the largest, Medicare, defense, and interest. Look at what's happening to interest over the next 20 or 30 years. Interest will soon potentially become the largest item in our budget. Interest expenses are projected to rise. You see that here again, look at the vertical dotted line, which is the past. Look at what the Congressional Budget Office is saying is going to happen over the next 10 years. They're saying that we're going to probably spend about $12.5 trillion just on interest. They're projecting by 2034, their interest expense will be $1.7 trillion, and that's probably low. Okay, I signed up for Social Security a couple of years ago. I love my Social Security. I don't want to go anywhere, and I'm sure this is in the news. Social Security is by far the largest program of the federal government. The problem with Social Security today, and many of you know this, look at 1964. We had 4 workers for every retired person. 84, it dropped to 3.2. It was relatively stable through 2004. This year, we're down to 2.7, and we're looking at, by in the next 20 years, only being 2.3 people working for every person on Social Security. That's not good. This looks at low-income seniors and how they rely on Social Security as a percentage of their income. If you look at the 2 quintiles to the left, this would be 40% of the population that is getting Social Security. It goes up to about 24,000 in income. They depend on Social Security for 81% of their income. The middle quintile goes up to about 39,000. They depend 61%. As the income goes up, you can see the Social Security becomes a smaller percentage of your income. The highest quintile, those over 72,000, the income percentage is only 15%. If I were on the Social Security Administration or in Congress and looked at this, those people over 72,000 are probably may have to take a hit. I'm sure you're aware of this. Social Security Trust Fund, Social Security has basically about 7 or 8 years left before the trust fund is depleted. There are 2 parts of Social Security. The old age survivors insurance, which is the bulk of the money. That's where most of the money is. And you got the disability insurance. But if you look at the old age survivors insurance, you can see that around 2033, that program will be depleted unless Congress does something to change it, okay? This chart, and there's a little bit of optimism in this chart. Hard to see it. The blue line is Social Security revenue. You want to have the revenue more than your expenses, obviously. And you can see what's happening now on the right-hand side of the dotted line, the projected. The benefits are far outpacing the revenue. So they've got to look at this at some point. Look way back over in 1980. Do you see where the orange went above the revenue? like in the early 80s. Do you remember that Ronald Reagan did? Ronald Reagan got a commission together and they addressed Social Security. They raised the taxes, they raised the age, and he brought in more government employees. And look what happened. The revenue then got back up above the expenses. So something got to be done to Social Security, because basically what this slide is the Social Security Administration. Social Security is saying in 2035 a 17% cut for everyone, because the only money coming in will be those paying Social Security taxes. This has been revised. The last time I saw this is now 2033, and it's 21% cut. So just a little bit on our debt, then we'll have time for questions. This chart just kills me as an investment advisor. This is the maturity schedule of the U.S. government treasuries. And you can see that 1 year, 29% of our bonds mature. 1 to 3 years, another 21%. 50% of our bonds mature in 2 years. We were telling every client, every family that we knew, if you have a home mortgage 2 or 3 years ago, refinance. Interest rates are probably the lowest they'll ever be. The government did not do this. They wanted the annual budget to look as good as possible. So rather than going out and locking in 10-year treasuries that were less than 1%, they were putting the money more in 6 month, 1 year to get a little bit lower rate. Well, guess where those rates are now? 4%. We could have locked in a lot of our deficit, a lot of our budget in longer term securities. And I hate that. Since 1970, the dependence on foreign governments has increased. In 1970, 95% of our debt was bought domestically, only 5% foreign. In 95, it went to 77 and 23. And last year, about 30% of our debt was sold to foreign countries. This is where all the debt is held. You can look at the dark blue lines. The Federal Reserve obviously has 5.2 trillion. Mutual funds that we all own have 3.6. Banks, state and local governments, pension fund, private pensions, insurance companies, other domestic buyers like me or those of y'all that buy treasuries. And a lot of people say that Japan owns us. China owns us. Actually, the largest debt country to us is Japan at 1.1 trillion. China is about 816 billion. Okay? Major, in my opinion, major missed opportunity. I heard Erskine Bowl and Alan Simpson speak at least 3 times. I think what they came up with generally was what they've got to do. Obama, to his credit, appointed the Simpson-Bowles Commission in 2010, 18 members, 12 from Congress, 6 private citizens, bipartisan group to look at this problem that we're talking about. It required a supermajority. You had to have a supermajority, 14 votes to approve it. They came up with a combination of spending cuts, tax increases, raising Social Security age, some cuts to military, domestic spending programs, increasing the gas tax. December 2010, 11 votes. It failed. It died. Some members of Congress tried to put a package together to kind of replicate this, but it went nowhere. So I'm sure Nick, all of our political folks, Chuck and Nick, I'm sure y'all know why. This is the third rail of politics. If you have a train that runs on electricity, there's a third rail with 600 volts in it. If you touch it, you die. And in politics, if you touch the gas tax, if you try to cut defense, if you try to raise this, raise that, you will not be reelected. Okay? Few takeaways, and then we can have a few questions. What's going to happen? Obviously, if this continues, we're going to have less money for the government to invest in public programs. The amount of money that the government is having to borrow is going to hurt and squeeze out corporations that need to raise money for growth. We could very well see our GDP decline because of the excessive debt. We could have the risk of another 2008 financial crisis, okay? Obviously, as I spoke earlier, the challenges to national security could be there, and it's going to hurt the safety net for millions of people that depend on the safety net. But there's hope. One of my favorite heroes is Winston Churchill. In World War II, he was trying to get Roosevelt to get into the war. And he said, Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all the alternatives. So with that, I'll try. I'm not an expert, but I'll try to answer some questions. Oh gosh, like I went too far. I'm sorry. Went too far. Any questions? Yeah.
Is that on? So has anybody looked at doing away with the cutoff when you pay the Social Security tax in your paycheck? I mean, there's a cutoff now, and
Oh, you talk about the Social Security FICA taxes?
yes.
Yes, it stops somewhere over $100,000, something like that.
Well, that seems to me that if you just do away with the cutoff, you could.
I'm sure that's going to be on the table.
It should be.
I personally think, I've told Chuck this recently, I think we will never see tax rates as low as they are right now. After World War II, we had 106 GDP, and with economic growth, we went down to 30%. Anybody have an idea what the highest tax rate was after World War II? 91%. Now, the average person paid about 40, but I mean, I'm not saying we're going back to 90, but I think you're going to see income tax rates higher. You're going to see government services reduced. I hope they don't cut defense, but it's a challenging issue. The sooner Congress looks at it, the better. Yeah, Mel. I did have room for. I mean, I could have had 100 slides. Okay, y'all know who James Carville is? James Carville was Bill Clinton's political advisor in the 90s before they did the raise taxes and got the deficit coming back down. Had those three balanced budgets. There was a bond crisis. Okay, and a group called the Bond Vigilantes, which is basically the bond market. Okay. It happened to Liz Truss in England a couple of years ago. She came in after Boris Johnson. She said, we're going to cut taxes and we're going to raise spending. The bond market freaked out. Okay, pound sterling dropped, their interest rates skyrocketed, and she resigned. So, Mel, what I think is going to happen is you're going to have the bond market just absolutely just say, we're not going to buy treasuries. I looked this week. The bid to cover ratio, which is how many treasuries are auctioned versus how much the bids were, this week was about 2.6 to 1. So if there's $100 billion in treasuries up for auction, there were bids for 260 billion. Okay, if you start seeing that dropping and there's less demand for treasuries, you'll see Congress act. But short of that, I don't think so. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I'm sorry.
I know we got some more questions out here. He'll be around
Yeah,
afterwards. Let me say something. That was a good presentation, but one of the most depressing ones I've heard.
Well, I'm sorry. But one quick thing. I forgot. Seymour Durst that put the clock on his building. The media asked him, why'd you do that? It makes people feel bad. And he said, well, that's good. It's working. Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you so much for your information. Let me share one thing with you. Paul's company holds the funds in our foundation, and more so than any other civic club in this area. It's a strong foundation, and I'm happy to tell you, as of today, we have $1,067,000 in that fund. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for being here today, and have a safe trip home. Drive careful. Thank you so much.